Now that the initial excitement has died down just a little bit and we've had a chance to look through the book in depth, have a look at the new units, decide what upgrades we're going to be taking, I think it's time to look at how to build a Wood Elf list. There are lots of cool aspects to the book that I'd like to put in lists, but maybe in the current meta aren't super useful, don't play the way that I want them to. Something that when I was looking at doing this video, I thought I'd like to write a Forest Spirit list as well, and I struggled to put one together that I was happy with. So maybe that's something that we look at towards the end of Wood Elf Week on Thursday. If there's interest, if you do want to see, how I would put together a Forest Spirit list, maybe a battle report with it if I get a chance, do let me know in the comments, because it's something that I'm really excited to do. But it is definitely something that's less competitive, so it would need to be something that people want to see to be worth their time. But the way that I'm thinking about this, because Wood Elves are an army that I think struggle to set the pace of the game. If you're playing something like Chaos, you're probably going to have the better stats. You're probably going to be quite wide units. You're going to want to full send forwards. You want to catch your opponent and deal as much damage as possible. With that in mind, you don't necessarily have to be able to deal with all these to the same extent. Obviously, you've got to have things that are good, but your plan to deal with a dragon might just be your dragon. I don't think Wood Elves have that luxury, and I think a lot of the stuff on this list actually really scares Wood Elf players in terms of how they're going to have to deal with them. So these are the things that I think are most important in terms of writing a list specifically for Wood Elves, but if there's anything you think I've missed, let me know in the comments. Number one is dragons. Now, dealing with dragons, there's two ways of dealing with dragons. There's number one, kill it. That's probably not what's happening here. Then there's number two, which is avoid it. So if you're playing against a dragon, you probably need to be able to not give up too many points to it. There's always going to be a risk of giving up points, but maybe you're just going to skirmish around it. That said, one of the two builds that I am putting together today does have an answer to dragons, so that might be the way that we go. But obviously, I think that the meta has moved away from dragons more at the top end than anything else. I think it's still something you need to plan for the mid-table, so maybe it's still a good inclusion, but whether it's worth spending that much of your character allocation on a specific anti-dragon model remains to be seen. However, dragons, that is the first thing we need to have a plan to deal with. Second of all, full send, and I've opened brackets chaos here, because it's usually chaos. Warriors of Chaos or Beastmen do it very well. Some other armies can do it as well. If you want to just full send forwards, I've been playing around with some High Elf lists, which you've got a lot of Silver Helms and Dragon Princes, but typically it's going to be Warriors of Chaos, and they've got specific issues that need to be dealt with. Following up on that note, random movers. Now, the obvious one here, we're talking Gigantic Chaos Spawn, because they can go in a random direction. One of the ways you can just play around with something like Wood Elves, where you've got moderate to kind of low damage, honestly, but you are really mobile, you can just stay out of range of your opponent and out of charge arc as well. If you're not able to stay out of charge arc because they're random movers, you need to have a plan to deal with them. Fortunately, Wood Elves are pretty well equipped to deal with them. Next up, Bretonnia. This is one of the hardest matchups for Wood Elves if you've been playing dragon builds. Like, Dragon Wood Elves, I think, struggle to deal with Bretonians more than most armies, even some of the legacy factions that are not doing well. But if you're playing the stag build, you might find that actually you're not as worried about Bretonnia in general, and I think that's something that we can lean into here as well. Vampire counts, I could have put these with Tomb Kings because both have a lot of the same issues, but I think they have their own unique challenges. Vampire counts, one of the things you're going to have to deal with is, ethereals, so banshees. You're actually quite well equipped to deal with that, but you need to make some choices before the game starts in terms of which laws of magic you're going to take, if you're going to take, any magical damage output as well. And then finally, we've got Tomb Kings. Tomb Kings are undead in the worst way, in that they are huge units typically, and you're going to struggle to chunk through them in any meaningful way because you kind of have to one round them before they get healed back up, and shooting really doesn't do that. They also have the issue of shooting that doesn't care about ballistic skill modifiers. So it would care about ballistic skill modifiers, doesn't care about modifiers to hit. So if you're playing Wood Elves, a lot of the time you're going to be leaning on that -1 to be hit for being a skirmisher. If you've got your Deepwood Scouts, you're going to be sat in a wood potentially, so you're -1 to be hit there as well. You're going to be trying to stack negative modifiers because you are basically a naked T3 body. That's not going to sustain you very well. So not being able to deal with that is difficult, and they've got the full send aspect of Tomb Kings, which is they can just take TMP, travel mystical pathways, take whatever brick of poison shooting archers or whatever their main threat is, send it forwards, while you also have to deal with large monsters, maybe a couple of dragons, maybe a couple of necrosphinxes. They can load them to the nines. So how do we deal with dragons? Well, I've put the big sexy build on the screen that I think I talked about yesterday or the day before. Again, credit to Ors, who is the person that I saw listing the build first. But you take a Glade Lord, you give them the Wild Rider Kindred, which gives them loads of special rules, countercharge. You come with Strikes First as well, built in, so you're pretty much always going to be hitting the dragon before it hits you. In fact, I don't think there's any situation where you won't be, even the Chaos one that's got the Strikes Last aura. Then you've also got Furious Charge and Frenzy, which gets you up to 6 attacks. You've got the Monster Slaying Sword, so any 6s to wound give you a Monster Slaying hit. No armor saves, no regen for your opponent. If they fail a ward save, they just out and out die. And then you've got, Orion's Favor, the new 25-point single-use magic item, which is reroll all hits and wounds. You don't have to use it. It's basically Paymaster's Coin, but better for the same price. And finally, a Befuddlement of Mischiefs, which gives them -1 weapon skill, -1 initiative. The initiative's less important here because you're such a high initiative, you're almost always going to be striking first. Maybe if you're playing against a Chaos player who's got an initiative buff, it actually matters. But by the by, it's basically just there for the -1 weapon skill. So you're hitting on 3s, re-rolling, wounding on 6s, but you're re-rolling. All that matters is the 6s. The maths is a little bit complicated here. I've got a different number to what they got, so someone double check my maths if you want. But I believe that gives you a 76.3% chance to get a 6 there, which is pretty high. And the strength of this sort of build is never really the fact that you will kill the dragon. It's kind of that your opponent has to play very cagey with their dragon. It's like the Pegasus Knight with the Virtue of Heroism, the Duke build, where you're running around, you're potentially killing some cheap units, you're always keeping their opponent's dragon, who's like 600 points on notice, because you know that if you go in for the kill, you're always going to get to attack at least once, and if you just roll that 6 and they fail the ward save, it's game over. That's 500-600 points, 100 points for the general. Really bad for the dragon player. So they're probably only going to go for the charge if they need the points, and you'll hopefully by that point be out of way. Speaking of being out of the way, that's the other thing that we can do when we're playing against dragons. This is the sort of playstyle that I was doing for the first, I want to say, 8 months of the year, which is just be out there charge arcs. It's not that difficult, especially if you've got Arcane Urgency, which is my favourite spell for sure. It's really strong. Being able to double move with skirmishes means that you're always going to be able to get out the way. You might want to travel mystical pathways as well. If you've got both of those spells in your list, it's nigh on impossible for a dragon to catch you, which is obviously fantastic when you're playing the avoidance playstyle. So potentially you go for the Glade Lord, who's going to go in there and chop things to pieces. However, that does make your matchup worse against everything that isn't dragons, and I actually don't think dragon armies are the number one thing in the meta. So this is kind of your mileage may vary. What does your local meta say you need? Because if you don't see a lot of dragons, this is 350 odd points that doesn't really do much. Moving on to point numero 2, and that is full send chaos. Chaos are a problem, and if they go first, they're even more of a problem because you do not have a lot of time to hit them. There are a few ways that you can deal with them. Terrain blocking. The tree that you get, using that to slow them down and block line of sight, really nice. Tree singing as well, really nice. Mobile units. While they're fast, they typically do have to respect the charge arcs. It's a lot of stuff that's in close order or open order. In the case of the Forsaken, you're just going to be looking to get 90 degrees, and if you've got a lot of skirmishers that can fire and flee or march, huge distances, 18 inches on the Glade Riders if you really need to get out of there, that's a good way to do things. Ideally, you want some sort of way to deal with armor saves. This is harder to fit into the list, and I wrote this out and then I built the list. I'm actually not sure there's a great way to deal with armor saves, but if you're going for something like Pillar of Fire, that is, in a way, dealing with armor saves, because you've got something in there that's AP2 that can start to chip away, finish off, do a couple of wounds here and there, finish off a unit where you need to kill something with a 3-up armor save, like the big unit of Chaos Knights that they often take. Or, maybe they're taking lots of Forsaken, so at that point, dealing with armor saves is a little bit less important. You also want to be not too reliant on magic, especially magic that needs to be close to your opponent. And this is where dealing with armor saves kind of becomes an issue, because if Puppet didn't exist, suddenly an Elementalism caster becomes quite exciting, I think, for Wood Elves. But Plague of Rust, 21-inch range Hex, they're probably always going to be able to keep the... given that you cast Plague of Rust before you move, your opponent has a turn to respond with their movement, they can always put their wizard in range of your Plague of Rust caster before you get to cast it. This is a pain in the backside. You can go for the level 2 that I was talking about the other day, where you just go level 2, Scout Kindred, Lore Familiar, and the Power Scroll as well. Turn 1 Plague of Rust, suddenly you light up the unit of Chaos Knights or Chosen with 40-odd poison shots, make them really suffer on turn 1. I think, unfortunately, while I like that build, it's difficult to fit in, because Lore Familiar is so good for the main caster you're bringing, given that you don't actually have any way of getting +1 spell. You haven't got a Spell Familiar. You haven't even got an expensive Spell Familiar like Empire have. So that's a little bit difficult. You also want Magic Missile Avoidance, so if you've got Evasion built into your list, that's strong. If you've got the ability to hide behind woods, that's strong. Just being able to outrange them as well. And then strong range damage. I actually don't know that Wood Elves have the strongest range damage. They have pretty okay range damage, and it's pretty consistent in that you can... It's split up into MSU. Given that it's MSU, it's harder for your opponent to shut down, which means that you're less likely to have a bad turn where your opponent's just full sended towards you, like, oh, well, I've just got to somehow teleport or march this unit out of the way, and suddenly I don't get a lot of shots. However, in this case, I don't know that we have enough range damage purely to deal with Chaos. So for me, playing Wood Elves into Chaos, it's going to be a lot of pick off what you can, avoid the dragon/dragons if they've got them, and, get as many points you can, go for a narrow win. And I think that's something that you'd be happy into in Full Send Chaos. I think it's probably one of the harder matchups if they're going quite wide and being able to rush you down. Then we've got the real problem, in my opinion, for Chaos, which is random movers. And again, I've just posted the Monster Slayer sword on this page, and that's because this character is the out-and-out answer to Chaos. Not only is it good against the Warpfire Dragon, it's good against the regular Chaos Lord and Dragon, it's good against the Giant Spawn. Mark and Nurgle just make the odds slightly worse because you've got to reroll your successful 6s to hit, which basically just means you're rerolling 1s, 2s, and 6s. It's fine. It's not too bad. You've got so many rerolls baked in there, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, these things do fortunately fall over to massed poison shooting, which you do have. Theoretically, it takes 36 shots from poison shooting, no matter the modifier, as long as it's less than -4, because all you're doing is fishing for 6s. And then, of course, they do have armor saves and regen in there as well, so it does buff it up there. But you can finish them off with a Ruby Ring of Ruin to maybe get that last wound or a Pillar of Fire. It's not unreasonable to kill one of these at range in a single turn, which is good because you're probably going to have to deal with that to punch a hole in the Chaos players' lines to make sure that you can get forwards. But again, if you do have the Glade Lord with the Monster Slaying Sword, this is going to eat the Giant Spawn for breakfast. Bretonnia. Now, Bretonnia is difficult, and as I mentioned when we were talking about how to build the list previously, Bretonnia can be one of the hardest matchups, and I think even if you go for a stag, it's not an easy matchup. However, when I was playing Wood Elves, and this was when you could just run triple Sister of the Thorn, Pillar of Fire, which was very strong against that, I think I won all of my games, or if maybe I lost one, but I definitely lost the majority of my games into Bretonnia. And the way that I did that was I had the Stag Lord, and now you can, if you want to, you can take a Stag Lord that has Countercharge. By taking Countercharge, you are also getting Frenzy, so they will probably just run you around if you're doing that. But you've got the ability to take Stag Lords and Stag Captains to deal with the Pegasus Knight threat. Is a Stag Lord going to win a 1v1 versus a Duke or a Baron? Honestly, kind of maybe. You can go, if you're going for the Monster Slayer build, no, you're just going to straight up lose because you've effectively got a magic hand weapon that does nothing. You don't even have a rule to give you rerolls to hit with hand weapons. Terrible. But if you go for the other build, which I think is probably going to be quite strong just in a general field, Stag, Aspect of the Bear, Ogre Blade, Talisman of Protection. This is pretty one-size-fits-all. It doesn't get you to a 2-up save, but it does get you a 3-up armor save, a 5-up ward, and you're still T5 with 4 wounds. I think that's a really decent way to go toe-to-toe with the Bretonnian players. The problem is you're probably not going to kill them in 1 round, and they can risk killing you in 1 round. However, if you're able to bunker in with a unit of, say, Wild Riders, if you want to take the risk, or Glade Guard, and you make sure that unit's got a unit champion as well, you can go in, they challenge, or you challenge with a champion, you make sure that you're not locked up, and then your Ogre Blade character can go to town on the Pegasus Knights, theoretically just cleave through the whole unit, which wouldn't be too unreasonable if, it's a unit 3. Depending on the size of the unit. Ogre Blade will do a lot of work into naked Pegasus Knights, is basically what I'm saying. What are the other things that are strong against Bretonnian? Let's say you haven't got the Stag Lord. Well, strong range threats is a great place to start. This is another place where Plague of Rust is really strong, but again, I really struggled to fit it into my list. Maybe my level 2 wizard, I'm going to go with Elementalism. Haven't quite figured that one out. But strong range threats is a really good way to deal with Bretonnia. You want to stay out of range of their bows. If they're running something like 30 peasant longbows, they're not going to kill a lot, but they will put pressure on your expensive units. So if you've got a wizard in a unit of Glade Riders that aren't, running around with a negative to hit, you might find that you lose 1 or 2 of those a turn, which over the course of the game really does add up, and that can start to threaten your wizard. So, strong range threats, but be aware of their range threats. Line of sight blocking in difficult terrain. Again, its tree singing's really good. Pillar of Fire is fantastic. A lot of the time, if my opponent's playing with units of Pegasus Knights that are a little bit spread out, if I'm towards the extent of their charge range, Pillar of Fire is really, really good, because what it does is it makes it harder for them to reach you. They have to go the most direct route possible, so if you just plonk a bit of difficult terrain in front of them, suddenly they're -1 to their movement characteristic, they're taking the lowest of 2 dice. Even if it's something like a 16-inch charge, that can mean the difference between all of them getting in, and actually they lose 2 models to, coherency if they're in skirmish, which is really expensive for the Bretonnian player. And honestly, the easiest way for you to kill Bretonnian Pegasus Knights. Other than that, early pressure. Really, if you can do damage turn 1, if you're playing against Grand Army, you're guaranteed to go first. If you're playing against Exiles, that's going to be a really difficult matchup, because they've got cannons that can try and snipe at your characters. They've got the Vanguard Banner unit that can just move into the centre of the board, can probably weather a turn of fire, and really just risks getting that turn 1 charge against you if you don't play super respectfully. If you're playing super respectfully, you can't put early pressure on. I think it's a difficult matchup in general. But there are ways that we can get around it, as discussed there. Next up, we've got Undead. And I think Undead are a really difficult matchup for Wood Elves traditionally. I think there are maybe some things that we can do. Obviously, the new caster that has got the Assailment spell, Dirthy's Wrath, where you're making their front rank take initiative tests and potentially take a lot of damage, that can be really good, especially with the amount of damage that you can do in terms of stacking up combat res. If you're killing, most of a front rank, that's a lot of wounds that'll count towards combat res, and maybe you can crumble that big brick. By the by, you probably still need to do some combo damage there. You also need to deal with Banshees. Now, this isn't the end of the world. Banshees are ethereal, but Pillar of Fire, if you've got it, is really strong. You can take a very cheap Spite. 10 points gives you magical attacks. I've only gone and forgotten the name of it, but it's the cheapest one. You'll see it in one of the lists later on. Blood Knight Pressure, very similar to Chaos. They can do very aggressive, very tanky Knight Pressure very well, and it's combined with the classic. Not only are they T4 with a 2-up save, which is a very bad profile for elves to deal with, they also have countercharge, so it's very difficult to get into them, and they've got the ability to bring back, is it 7 of them? I think it's D3 plus wizard level, so if there's at least 4 in the unit and they don't die to crumble, yeah, it's rough. It's very difficult to deal with the full unit of Blood Knights. I'll have to have a look at the initiative. Maybe if their initiative's really bad and they've gone wide, that's something that we could play around with. But Blood Knight Pressure, something that you've got to be able to deal with as well. And again, this is a really good army to bring Pillar of Fire into. I'm going to say the same for Tomb Kings. Pillar of Fire, super good against Undead. one of the win conditions you can have is just get that into their backlines. Try and get it through their level 2 wizard that's out of their unit if they've got one, through the Banshees, get it over the Mortis Engine. If you're making them heal the Mortis Engine, which only heals a wound a turn, but they're worried about losing their general because it's also a large target and you can put poison shots into it, they're not also healing the big unit in front of them that you've managed to kill 6 models in. You just got to try and weirdly spread damage, not to your detriment. You've got to focus fire, but if you can spread a little bit of damage, like to put a little bit of damage onto the general so they feel like they have to heal that up, at that point you can get away with them not healing a lot more wounds onto the units of rank and file, which heal up real quickly. So vampire count's a difficult one, but we've got some aspects to play with there. Finally on the list, Tomb Kings, and I think Tomb Kings might actually be the most difficult matchup. So if you look at them, there's a lot of issues. Making damage stick. We've just talked about this for the undead. For vampire counts, I think it's arguably worse here for Tomb Kings, because you might see big units. You've got big units of Ashabti, you've got big units of teleporting, poison, shooting archers. There's a lot of things in there that are quite beefy. Yes, they do have multiple large monsters, if we just jump down to the bottom. And those large monsters are actually kind of easy for you to kill with poison shooting. I say easy. Easy comparatively. They're going to have a good regen. They don't have a good armor save, which is nice. So you can shoot them with loads of poison shooting. They only heal back a single wound on each one, unless they're going Mortuary Cult, at which point you can heal multiple wounds. But yeah, that's a different problem. So making damage stick, I think, is more difficult in this list for Tomb Kings than it is for anyone else. You probably want to really double down and just try and win in deployment against Tomb Kings, because if you don't get that very early lead, I think you're going to struggle. They're going to be able to overwhelm you. Shooting that ignores modifiers. We talked about this. Arrows of Asp, they're going to hit you on 5-ups. If you're leaning on the fact that you've got -1 or -2 to hit on all of your units realistically when they're in the woods, yada yada, this is going to be a problem. Even though you're quite mobile and they're not necessarily going to be volley firing into you with that big poison shooting unit, even if they just face you with 10, 11, 13 models, something like that, you're going to find that you're losing a couple of very expensive elves a turn, maybe 3 or 4, depending on how your opponent rolls, and it can start to add up when you're not able to do anything, and it lowers your damage output while their damage output stays the same. TMP. This is a unit that really abuses Travel Mystical Pathway as well. They're going to be potentially running a unit of 60 archers. I'm not even talking about Royal Host that can run the big pie plate of 180 models. Honestly, against that army, you may be better off because you can just run and hide and play for a draw. But into the standard Tomb Kings or Mortuary Cult Tomb Kings, they can just bring a big unit of archers, teleport them around the board, and that's very difficult for you to deal with because you don't have cheap screening units, or not very many. Eagles are cheapish. Depending on what your opponent or your tournament or your general play group uses as the gap for a 10-10 draw, you might find that a couple of Eagles, if you lose them and you don't manage to kill anything, that doesn't actually lose you anything. You still get a 10-10 draw, so that might be the way to go. But a difficult one to play around the Travel Mystical Pathways. Again, a very good army to bring Pillar of Fire against. If you can get it into the back lines, theoretically, a single Pillar of Fire bouncing through a Casket and a... what's the stone thrower called? The Screaming Skull Catapult. Whatever they've got in the back line, they're more likely to have foot characters, especially if you're playing Mortuary Cult. There's a lot of points that you can pick up here, and even more so than vampire counts. If you manage to get the right thing, potentially you can even get the Hierophant. You can make that army crumble. Maybe. But it's very good having Pillar of Fire. So if you can take one, do. If you can take multiple, that's probably good as well. So, we've talked about what we need to deal with. What does it look like when you put it all together? Well, there's 2 lists. I want to start off with the one that I'm less excited about first. They're very similar. It's mostly the characters that have changed. So we'll start off the one that I probably wouldn't play myself. However, when I put my dragon video up, a lot of people were saying in the comments, my local meta is still very dragon dominated, my playgroup is still loads of dragons, when I go to tournaments I still see dragons most games. If that's the experience you're having, something like this could probably be quite strong, especially if you're playing into a lot of chaos, you take multiple monsters that you can deal with. Maybe you play against beastmen who still run Gorgons, especially with the new book coming out, maybe that's something that you have to deal with a little bit more. So this is more a meta pick. If you find that you're playing against dragons 50% or more of your games, maybe this is the way that you go. So we've got the Glade Lord, who's got the Wild Rider Kindred. Obviously, we've tooled them out to the nines. Dragon Slaying Sword, Orion's Favour, so you're going to be re-rolling your hits and wounds on that very important turn. Single Charm Shield, because 3 points more than a normal shield, why wouldn't you take the ward save? Stag gives you a little bit of toughness, and then the Befuddlement of Mischiefs as well. Really important to have that here because it gets you from hitting on 4s to 3s when you're against another Lord with Weapon Skill 7. Unfortunately, it does mean that we can't put it on the Spellweaver, which is another reason that I don't love this list. I think it's lacking a little bit. But that's your anti-dragon tech in there, and it does its job well. Onto the Spellweaver, level 4, Unicorn. We're going for Lore of the Wilds. We've taken the 15-point Heartwood Pendant, the new extremely common magic item that you can take to get access to Lore of the Wilds outside of the Talisman Detachment. Lore Familiar, Talisman Protection, Power Scroll as well. This is just a case of, it's quite a flexible model. It's going to be joining the Sisters of the Thorn, which are tanky by elf standards. They've got a 4-up ward save. You can give them the 5-up regen from the Lore of the Wild spell. You can move 9 inches. You can give them reserve moves, so you're... Obviously, the Sisters of the Thorn can shoot their javelins and march, but you can also fire your magic missile off. D3 plus 1, strength 6, AP 2, damage 2 hits is really nice. While a fully equipped dragon's maybe not going to fall over to it, if you're having issues with, let's say, Gigantic Spawn, this is something that actually threatens it. You get them straight to the regen if you wound. 2 wounds is nothing to be sniffed at. You can just do a good chunk of damage there. Third up, we've got a Spellsinger. This is the piece that I'm least excited about. I want Ruby Ring of Ruin in this list. I find it to be quite important for Wood Elves. When you're playing a ranged damage style like this, you need more reliable damage. And yes, it's not reliable in that it's only casting at +2, so you need to roll a 5 on the dice, which is, you still go off 70% of the time, but your opponent's probably pretty likely to dispel it. This is a caster that wants to be out of range of your opponent's dispel threats, which is why it's not on the main caster that's going to be running around trying to get up there in the mix. So this is going to be joining the Glade Riders. The lore is to be decided. You could do a lot of different things, because you only know 2 spells, and I've decided that Lore Familiar is too important for the Lore of the Wilds to give up here. It's difficult to say what you could go for. You can use this as basically a backup Tree Singing caster, although you're not super likely to get the high value. Even just getting it on the 7 is really nice, because you can use it to put difficult terrain in front of your opponent. You're less able to block vision, but if you only need to block a little bit of vision from a dragon, potentially that's something that works for you. Lots of options there. With that in mind, maybe don't go Illusion. Illusion's quite nice for Glittering Robes, only casts on a 7, super easy to get off, and you always guarantee to get it. But if you're going to pick up Tree Singing, maybe just roll Battle Magic, because you kind of likely. You've got a 1 in 3 chance of getting a damage spell. Not the exact odds, I think, but there's 2 damage spells, you get 2 spells, you probably roll one of them, or if not, maybe you get Arcane Urgency, which you're unlikely to cast, but when it goes off is fantastic. Maybe you get Oaken Shield, which would be really nice, giving that unit a little bit more reliability. Curse of Arrow Attraction. There's almost nothing in that lore that's bad, so Battle Magic's probably the go-to. As mentioned, joining into the Glade Riders, Hagbane Tips, reserve move, champion and standard with the Banner of Midsummer's Eve. This gives you ignores cover on your shooting. Not mentioned on the Spellsinger, I did want to try and fit the 10-point sprite on there that gives you magical attacks. The reason for that is you need to have some way of dealing with ethereal models, such as Banshees, the Green Knight. More recently, we're seeing people play around with things like the Black Coaches, so you definitely want some magical attacks in there. And again, this unit's relatively okay at dealing with them. 8 shots, poison, they can move, they can reserve move after they've shot and after you've done your Ruby Ring of Ruin. Banner of Midsummer's Eve means that you're going to be hitting probably on 4s a lot of the time, which is not too shabby. 3 units of Deepwood Scouts, 2 of them are in core, all of them have Hagbane Tips, nice and easy there. This is my go-to sort of default elf with bow. They're great. They've got Fire and Flee. They are able to, skirmish. Well, they come with skirmish. If you've got them in a wood, they're at -2 to be shot by ballistic skill shooting. I think they're really solid for what they do, and you're only looking at paying about 120, 130 points for 8 of them, which is not too shabby at all. Single unit of 5 Glade Guard, because you have to. I really don't like this unit. In my eyes, they are hard to use in that they give up points quite easily. Potentially, you just look at putting them in a marching column, so you can always volley fire, which is a silly rule, but you can volley fire half the unit, half the rank, rounding up. If it's 1, rounding up becomes 1. If you move, you immediately lose your shots, but it also means that potentially they can march 15 inches to block or to get out the way. Something like that. And then we've got the aforementioned Sister of the Thorn. Went full command, gave them the Banner of the Hunter King. This gives you Vanguard. This lets you Vanguard your Lore of the Wilds caster. If you watched the video about builds I did, I think being able to Vanguard a level 4 wizard is really strong. Gives the ability to either get into or out of dispel range of your opponent for turn 1, depending on, not depending on who goes first. You do it before you know the role. But if your opponent's really looking to cast enchantment spells or TMP or any other movement spell that they have to cast before they move, that's really nice to be able to deny it. If not, if you just want to get out of the magic missiles, you can use your move to just be like, actually, I'm going to move sideways a little bit. I'm going to move backwards. I'm going to make it so that even though you deployed after me, you don't get to deal with me. Rounding out the list, we've got 2 units of Wild Riders. I've given them shields, and one of the unit has a unit champion because we're going to put the Glade Lord in there. If you've ever got a character joining a unit, always have a unit champion. Just means that if you get charged, if there's a challenge that you don't want to have to go for, you can always just feed them a unit champion. Nice and easy to do there. And 2 Great Eagles. I haven't actually played with Great Eagles since I was about 15, and I think it's about time that I started doing it. They are the obvious choice if you're looking to protect a unit that has Frenzy from charging. Wild Riders do have a lot of output. So why have we made the choices that we have in this list? Well, I've never been a huge fan of Wild Riders, but since the nerf to Sisters of the Thorn, I think they are maybe the best unit that we can fill in the points that we were spending in Special. Because you can't just spend 1,500 points in Special on characters, although I would be very tempted to do so. Wild Riders hit pretty hard, and while that's not going to deal with your dragon problems, it kind of does deal with the undead problems. If you can get a couple of units of Wild Riders into a big unit of undead, or maybe the Wild Riders and the Spellweaver, some combination of a multi-charge there, you can potentially crumble quite a big unit through killing the entire front rank, doing some extra wounds, hitting them with all of that combat res from overkill damage or just wounds, and crumbling the unit there. So I think Wild Riders are pretty decent. Keeping them cheap, I've given them shields, just gives them a bit more protection from fireballs. You're not too upset if they do run away and die because of Frenzy, and hopefully they take something with it on the way. Frenzy is obviously a downside, especially if you're playing into Dragon's list. So again, maybe this list shouldn't actually have Wild Riders. If we're playing the sort of my meta is heavy on dragons, what you don't want to do is have a unit charge your opponent's dragon that's not, you've spent loads of time getting out of their charge arc. You have to charge in because of Frenzy. They kill you, they test to reform, they face the direction they want to charge, and then suddenly the game is over. So maybe in the anti-dragon meta we don't look at that. But I think it's hard to find other things to spend in Special. You can go Way Watchers and Way Stalkers, but I think that's a really inefficient way to spend your points. War Dancers, fun. I don't think this is the meta for them, so Wild Riders is kind of where I landed on them. Then, not too long to go through this list, this is very similar. This is just changing around. Instead of going for a Glade Lord that is trying to get up there and mix it up with dragons, this is a Glade Lord who can kill a lot of things, but not dragons. So we've got a Stag, and I've gone Aspect to the Bear, getting them up to Strength 7 with the Ogre Blade and T5. They've got a Talisman of Protection, and they've got a 3-up armor save. So they've got 4 wounds, toughness 5, 3-up armor save, 5-up ward. Pretty tanky. I'd like the 2-up save in there as well, but I haven't been able to fit it in if we're going Ogre Blade. We've changed up the Spellweaver a little bit here. We did take off the Talisman Protection. I thought it was important to have on the Lord, especially if we're going to go toe-to-toe with Pegasus Night Lords. Plenty of stuff in there. Level 4, Lord of the Wilds, again on a Unicorn. Instead of going Talisman Protection, we just went for another Power Scroll, and I did put the Befuddlement of Mischiefs on this unit here. Befuddlement, again, really strong if you're going for Durthu's Wrath. Durthu's Wrath, reminder, is the assailment spell. When it goes off, every model in your opponent's fighting rank of a single unit has to take an initiative test. If they fail the initiative test, they take D3 Strength 4 hits with no armor saves or regens, I believe, but you do get to take the ward saves. This will just crunch things, so really nice. A little bit squishier, but you're still, Aspect of the Bear gets you up to toughness 4. You're on a unicorn, so you've got that 4th wound. It's going to be hard for people to kill you accidentally. They'll have to engineer it so they've got something that hits reasonably hard into you to actually do that. And you're an elf, so you're probably going to hit them first, even though you're not a super combat elf. Again, we've got the Spellsinger. I think I like this just as a general buy with the Glade Riders. Not much else has changed in there. I did have to tweak points a little bit, so I think took out the unit champion from the Wild Riders. But in this build, I'm probably not putting the Glade Lord in with the Wild Riders. I'm probably having it solo, really making the most of that 360-degree charging ability. So that's how I've been looking at writing Wood Elf lists, and I have gone through various different versions, and it is times like these that always make me wish that all of the army builders had got release copies ahead of time so they were able to go and people were able to use them, because writing in on pads of paper and notebooks and all that sort of stuff, it's not quite as fun, I find, as just clicking the buttons, and I find it I have to do a lot more math to make sure that I've not made mistakes. But by the by, is there anything that you think I've missed? Any directions that you would have gone down differently to me? Anything that you think I've not identified as a threat in the meta? Let me know in the comments. Interested to hear how you're going to be playing Wood Elves, because I've been struggling to put good Wood Elf lists together ever since the Pillar of Fire changed to Sisters of the Thorn. And you can do more stuff with the characters, but you're still kind of playing with the same tools. So I'm curious to see if the stuff that's been brought in the new Arcane Journal is enough, and if not, if we get any changes coming up over the next couple of months to make Wood Elves maybe positioned more interestingly than they have been previously. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those, name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff, but it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Ground Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Grail Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.